The opulent chandelier in Emily's new penthouse apartment cast a dazzling, almost blinding light. It was a stark contrast to the modest comfort of my own home, a life I had diligently built over decades of work and sacrifice. A life that now felt distant and irrelevant in the face of her sudden immense wealth. The occasion was ostensibly a celebration of her inheritance, a substantial sum that had flowed from Eleanor's estate. My late wife's meticulous planning ensuring our daughter's financial future, yet the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken tension, a chill that had settled between us since the news of the inheritance had become concrete. Emily, dressed in an impossibly chic designer gown, her smile, polite but distant, had been effusive with her thanks in the initial weeks. But that had faded quickly, replaced by a subtle, then overt distancing. Today, however, the distance became a chasm, as I recounted a fond memory of her childhood. A simple story about her fascination with the stars, she cut me off with a gesture that was both dismissive and final. "Dad," she began, her voice carefully modulated, devoid of warmth, "it is lovely that you remember those times. But honestly, with this inheritance my life has changed. I'm moving in different circles now. Mark and I are planning extensive renovations, international travel. We're entering a new phase." She paused, then delivered the blow, her eyes meeting mine with a startling lack of remorse. "It's just... I do not really need you anymore, Dad. You've done so much, and I'm so grateful. But really, you're an extra mouth to feed, an extra drain on resources we now need for ourselves. Mark and I need to be practical, an extra mouth." The words, delivered with such chilling finality, struck me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and leaving a hollow ache in my chest. 15 years I had dedicated myself to her well-being, sacrificing career opportunities, delaying my own retirement dreams, all to provide her with a stable, loving home and the best possible future. Eleanor's inheritance was meant to be a safety net for both of us, a comfort in our later years, not a tool for my own obsolescence. The sheer cruelty of her statement, the casual discarding of a lifetime of paternal love and sacrifice, left me speechless, reeling. The expensive lilies in the vase, a centerpiece I had sent for the occasion, seemed to mock me with their cloying sweetness. I sat there, my hands clasped tightly, the polished table reflecting a face I barely recognized, a mask of polite expectation, an actor in a play where my role had just been terminated. Arthur Jr., my son, was not present. He had his own life, his own struggles, and I had learned not to burden him. But this was different. This was a fundamental violation of the parent-child bond, a ruthless severing born from the intoxicating lure of sudden wealth. The memory of Eleanor, my late wife, her gentle wisdom, her unwavering belief in our daughter's potential, now felt like a distant, bittersweet echo. Eleanor had always been the anchor of our family, her nurturing spirit a stark contrast to Emily's burgeoning materialism, a trait that had only intensified after Eleanor's passing. I recalled Emily's childhood, a tapestry woven with my efforts to provide stability and opportunity. Her expensive art classes, her brief, unsuccessful foray into gallery representation, the small apartment I had rented for her when her initial business ventures faltered. Each expenditure was a testament to my belief in her, my desire to see her succeed, to find fulfillment. I had always encouraged her artistic pursuits, even when they seemed impractical, believing that passion would eventually lead to prosperity. I had delayed upgrading my own car, foregone numerous vacations, and carefully managed my investments, all with the unspoken understanding that Emily's future was a priority. Eleanor, in her final days, had expressed her own subtle concerns. "Theodore," she would whispered, her voice frail but firm, "Emily has a good heart, but she's easily swayed by appearances. Ensure her inheritance is managed wisely for her own good. And don't forget your own needs, my love. You deserve peace too." Her words, intended as loving counsel, now felt like a prescient warning. I had managed Eleanor's estate with meticulous care, ensuring Emily's inheritance was substantial, a sum meant to provide security and freedom. I had believed this security would foster her independence and appreciation, not breed a sense of entitlement that led her to discard the very person who had helped shape her life. The foundation of my sacrifice was built on love and trust, but looking back, I saw how easily it could be eroded by the corrosive influence of sudden, unearned wealth. Emily's ambition, always a driving force, had perhaps taken a darker turn with the millions now at her disposal. The stark finality of Clara's words, the casual dismissal of my paternal role, had chipped away at the protective layers of denial I had unconsciously maintained. As I stood on the curb, the cold pavement seeping through my coat, the carefully constructed narrative of a loving, supportive family began to unravel. The wedding, a financial strain I had readily accepted to honor Arthur Jr.'s milestone, now appeared as a calculated investment in their escape. a final extraction before disappearing from my life. The sheer brazenness of Clara's statement, an extra mouth to feed, was a cruel inversion of everything I believed family meant. It was not about sustenance. It was about value, about belonging, about being cherished. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My love, my sacrifices, my entire paternal identity had been reduced to a financial liability in their eyes. I had been so focused on providing for my children, on ensuring their success and happiness, that I had neglected to secure my own future, to protect myself from the very people I had sworn to love and support. My life, which I had carefully built upon a foundation of trust and familial loyalty, was suddenly shattering around me. The comfortable retirement I had envisioned, peaceful years ahead, filled with Arthur's Sr.'s memory and shared legacies, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Anger, hot and sharp, began to simmer beneath the shock and disbelief. It wasn't just about the financial loss, though. The scale was devastating. It was about the violation, the betrayal of everything I held dear, my trust, my love, my paternal role. My carefully constructed world, built on the assumption of unbreakable familial bonds, had been systematically dismantled by the very person I had sworn to protect and nurture. I sat on the curb, the cold pavement seeping through my coat, and looked at the building. My building now, a symbol of my profound loss and humiliation. The truth was undeniable. I had been a fool, blinded by paternal love and an unwavering belief in my son's character. The consequences were catastrophic, reaching far beyond the depleted bank account. This was not just a financial loss. It was an existential one, a shattering of my reality, a stark confrontation with the void where my son used to be. The wedding, a symbol of continuity and family strength, had instead become the stage for its ultimate destruction. I was no longer a father. I was a victim, a mark, a fool who had poured his heart and soul into a well that ran dry without a single drop of genuine affection returned. The stark realization hit me with full force. My love, my financial support, my very presence in his life, had been a commodity, a means to an end, and once that end was achieved, I was discarded. Driven by a desperate need for answers, for a shred of explanation that could make sense of this unfathomable act, I decided to approach the building's main entrance. A place I had entered countless times as the owner, the manager, the provider, perhaps in person faced with the reality of my presence and the public humiliation of my eviction. They would be forced to confront me to offer some semblance of an explanation, however hollow, however late. As I approached the entrance, a palpable tension emanated from within, the air thick with a manufactured calm that felt more ominous than outright hostility. I could see Sarah and Mark through the glass doors, their silhouettes framed by the warm interior light. A stark contrast to my desolate position on the cold, windswept street. I pressed the buzzer for Arthur Jr.'s unit. Silence. I tried again, a firm, insistent press. Then a third time, still no answer. A sense of dread, cold, and absolute washed over me, chilling me to the bone. I then reached for my phone, dialing Arthur Jr.'s mobile, the same phone that had gone straight to voicemail since yesterday morning. This time, to my immense surprise, it rang. My heart leaped with a desperate, fragile hope, a tiny spark against the encroaching darkness. Arthur Jr., I managed, my voice tight, cracking with a mixture of relief and apprehension. A click, and then a distorted voice, heavily accented, replied, "This number is no longer in service." The line went dead, disconnected, erased. It was a brutal, undeniable confirmation, a final, chilling punctuation mark on their elaborate deception. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had erased me from their lives, from their future, from their very existence. I stood on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation. The sounds of the city blurred around me, the distant sirens, the laughter of passersby, the ordinary bustle of life a stark, painful contrast to the seismic shift that had occurred within me. They were gone, vanished. And with them, my son, my trust, and the life I had known. The wedding, I now understood with sickening clarity, had been the final curtain call on a performance of filial devotion, a meticulously planned exit strategy. The anger which had been simmering beneath the shock and disbelief now threatened to consume me entirely. It wasn't just a betrayal of trust. It was a calculated, deliberate act of destruction, a crime perpetrated with a cold, unnerving precision. As I stood there on the sidewalk, the city's relentless energy, a painful counterpoint to my internal devastation, a profound sense of clarity, sharp and cold, began to cut through the lingering shock and despair. They had taken my home, my financial security, and my daughter's love, but they had not taken my will nor my dignity. They had orchestrated my eviction, their ultimate act of betrayal, with a chilling precision. But in doing so, they had also inadvertently unleashed something within me. This wasn't just about reclaiming lost assets. It was about reclaiming myself. I turned away from their silent, imposing building, my steps no longer faltering but purposeful, imbued with a new, unexpected resolve. My first act of defiance wouldn't be to chase them, to beg for answers, or to plead for explanations from the void they had left behind. My first victory would be to refuse to be defined by their actions, to refuse to let their betrayal shatter the core of who I was. I walked not towards the comforting familiarity of my home, which now felt tainted and threatened, but towards the nearest bank. Then to the offices of a reputable legal firm specializing in property law and business disputes. My voice when I spoke to the receptionist was steady, filled with a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. "My daughter has evicted me from my own building," I stated, my gaze direct and unwavering. "She has taken everything. I need to understand my legal options and how to regain control." It was a small step, perhaps, against a tide of immense loss and overwhelming betrayal, but it was my step. It was the first assertion of my will against their calculated destruction. It was the moment I refused to be a passive victim, to be defined solely by what had been taken from me. The anger, the despair, the humiliation of being cast out by my own child, the sheer audacity of their greed, these were bitter pills. But in that moment, standing at the precipice of a new, unwelcome reality, I chose not to be broken. I chose to fight. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with the daunting prospect of legal battles and the crushing weight of emotional recovery. But in that single, defiant act, I had taken the first crucial step towards reclaiming my own agency, and by extension, my liberation. The feeling of empowerment, though fragile, was a stark contrast to the helplessness that had threatened to consume me moments before. This was not the end. It was the beginning of my fight. The sterile, impersonal environment of Mr. Davies' law office offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of leather-bound books and polished wood, a world away from the ostentatious grandeur of the Crestwood Hotel ballroom or the chilling emptiness of my former home. Mr. Davies, a man whose professional demeanor was tempered by a quiet understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. His gaze was steady, his questions precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of a legal investigation. "Mr. Vance, your daughter Sarah, what is her profession? And her husband Mark? What is their financial background? Any history of debt, risk-taking behavior, or unusual financial dealings leading up to the wedding or the eviction?" His inquiries were not about the emotional devastation, the shattering of paternal love, but about factual evidence, about the mechanics of the crime, about the cold, hard data that could form the basis of a case. He explained the complexities of property law, the intricacies of contesting a business decision made under duress or through manipulation, and the paramount importance of gathering every piece of documentation I possessed. The original property deeds, the business incorporation papers, any communication records, any proof of my sole ownership and management of the building. "We'll need to review the current ownership structure," he stated, his voice grave, his brow furrowing as he read the eviction notice, and my own hastily gathered financial statements. "But your claim as the original owner and developer is strong. The eviction itself, if improperly executed, could also be grounds for legal action. We must act swiftly to secure your rights and explore every avenue to reclaim what is rightfully yours." His words, though offering a fragile flicker of hope in the possibility of legal recourse, also underscored the enormity of the challenge ahead. This was no longer just a matter of emotional hurt. It was a legal battle for my home, my security, my very identity. He advised me to immediately secure all remaining financial assets, change all passwords, and cease all direct communication with Sarah and Mark, directing them to communicate solely through his office. He stressed the importance of documenting every interaction, every perceived threat, every subtle act of intimidation. He also suggested that we explore the possibility of proving Sarah's financial motive, perhaps through evidence of her own precarious financial situation prior to the inheritance and her subsequent extravagant spending, which could demonstrate a pattern of behavior driven by desperation and greed. He confirmed my suspicion that the wedding itself and the subsequent eviction were not driven by necessity but by a calculated desire to seize control and profit from my vulnerability. The efficiency of his office, the systematic way they began processing my case, the quiet determination in his eyes, provided a sliver of comfort in the encroaching darkness. He was my first ally, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos, a stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility. He outlined the procedures, filing an immediate injunction against further property changes, gathering evidence of Sarah and Mark's financial dealings and any co-ownership claims they might assert, and preparing for a potential legal fight to reclaim the building. He emphasized the need to act quickly to prevent them from further leveraging my assets or alienating the property. The days that followed my initial consultation with Mr. Davies were a bleak landscape of legal paperwork and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The eviction had left me temporarily displaced, staying in a modest hotel room that felt impersonal and cold. A stark contrast to the warmth and familiarity of the home I had built. The silence was broken only by the phantom echo of Sarah's cruel words, an extra mouth to feed a constant agonizing reminder of the profound betrayal. I found myself replaying the entire scenario, searching for the moments I had missed. The subtle signs of Sarah's growing ambition and her husband Mark's avarice, their insistence on a lavish wedding, their subtle financial maneuvering, their casual dismissal of my contributions, it all painted a picture I had been too blind to trusting to see. It was during one of my solitary, aimless walks through the city streets, a need to escape the sterile confines of the hotel room, that I found myself near the offices of Vance Properties, the company I had founded and poured my life into. On impulse, I entered the building not to confront, but simply to be in a space that represented my life's work. As I stood in the lobby, a sense of profound loss washed over me. The building now a symbol of my displacement. It was then that I encountered Mrs. Gable, a longtime tenant in one of my residential properties. A woman of quiet observation and unexpected warmth, who had often shared tea and conversations with Arthur Sr. and knew me well. Seeing my visible distress, she approached not with intrusive pity, but with a gentle, knowing presence. "Theodore," she began softly, her eyes reflecting a deep well of compassion that seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed facade. "I heard what happened. What a terrible thing. Arthur Sr. would be heartbroken." Her words, simple and direct, cut through the emotional haze. She didn't pry, but she listened as I hesitantly at first. Then, with a flood of pent-up emotion, recounted the events of the wedding, the eviction, the cold finality of Sarah's actions. She shared her own experiences. A sister who had, over years, systematically drained her parents' savings through elaborate scams. A nephew who had vanished after a series of fraudulent schemes. "You are not alone in this, Theodore," she said, her hand resting gently on mine, a simple touch that conveyed immense comfort. "It is a special kind of pain when the ones you love most become the architects of your deepest hurt. But you are strong. Arthur Sr. knew that. He saw that strength in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." Mrs. Gable became my anchor in the storm. She invited me for tea, encouraged me to talk, and crucially, shared practical advice gleaned from her own hard-won experiences: how to navigate the complex legal landscape, how to secure my remaining assets, how to begin building a new support system. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced their own trials of betrayal, financial ruin, and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her practical advice about legal standing, about tenant rights, and about the possibility of challenging the transfer of ownership was invaluable. She also shared a crucial piece of information. She had overheard Sarah bragging to Mark about how they were going to finally make something of the building, and how my sentimental attachment was a hindrance. This confirmed that Sarah's actions were not born of necessity, but of a ruthless desire for control and profit. The sheer audacity of Sarah's actions, the calculated nature of her deception, had stripped away layers of paternal optimism and naive trust, leaving behind a raw, unvarnished clarity about the true state of my family relationships. I spent hours poring over my original property deeds, my business incorporation papers, and the meticulous financial records of Vance Properties, not just to gather evidence for Mr. Davies, but to truly understand the extent of what had been stolen and manipulated. The sheer volume of my contributions, the years of sacrifice represented by each renovation, each tenant acquisition, each business decision. It was staggering. It wasn't just about the monetary value of the building. It was about the misplaced trust, the emotional currency I had so freely spent, believing it was an investment in love and loyalty. I realized with a painful clarity how much of my life had been defined by my children's needs, how their aspirations had dictated my financial decisions, how my own goals and desires had been placed on indefinite hold, waiting for a future that now seemed like a cruel illusion. The building, once a symbol of my stability, my anchor in the world, now felt like a stark reminder of my vulnerability, a space that could be taken from me at any moment by the very person I had raised. Yet, as I sat in the quiet of my hotel room, surrounded by the sterile anonymity of its furnishings, a quiet determination began to take root, pushing back against the despair. I had built this business from the ground up, and I would not let it be seized through deceit. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the business, it was in the resilience he had instilled in me, in the unwavering belief he had in my capabilities. I started taking small, deliberate steps to reclaim my sense of self, to rebuild a life that was no longer solely defined by my daughter's needs or her betrayals. I visited Eleanor's grave, not in sorrow but in quiet communion, sharing my plight, seeking her enduring wisdom and the strength she always seemed to possess. I went to the local hardware store, a place I hadn't visited in years, for my own projects, and bought supplies, rediscovering the satisfaction of hands-on work, a grounding activity that connected me to the tangible reality of my labor. I started attending the bridge club meetings Mrs. Gable had recommended, forcing myself to engage, to converse, to be present in the moment, away from the suffocating shadow of my daughter's betrayal. These were not grand gestures, but small, deliberate acts of self-preservation. Tentative steps towards rebuilding a life that was solely my own, a life no longer dictated by the needs or deceits of others. The isolation was still profound. The loss of my daughter's love, a gaping wound that ached with a constant dull throb, but the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own financial struggles after her husband's sudden death, how she had rebuilt her life through sheer determination and a strong support network. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar betrayals, financial ruin and profound loss, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. This new community, forged in shared experience, offered a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her practical advice about legal standing, about tenant rights, and about the possibility of challenging the transfer of ownership was invaluable. She also shared a crucial piece of information. She had overheard Sarah bragging to Mark about how they were going to finally make something of the building, and how my sentimental attachment was a hindrance. This confirmed that Sarah's actions were not born of necessity, but of a ruthless desire for control and profit. This confirmed the predatory nature of her actions and solidified my resolve to fight. The legal battle ahead loomed like a dark cloud, the initial shock of betrayal giving way to a cold, hard resolve. Mr. Davies confirmed that Sarah and Mark had not only seized the building but had also begun making changes, subtly altering lease agreements and, most disturbingly, informing tenants that rent increases were imminent, a move designed to swiftly drain the property's revenue and solidify their control. My legal team's primary objective was to file an immediate injunction to halt any further property transactions or significant changes until the ownership dispute could be resolved. The evidence of my sole proprietorship and decades of fair management was substantial, supported by original deeds, incorporation papers, and tenant affidavits attesting to my integrity. However, Sarah's actions suggested a deeper layer of deception, possibly involving forged documents or manipulation of Arthur Sr.'s final affairs during his illness to gain leverage or sole control over the property transfer, circumventing the established legal protections for spouses and children alike. Detective Miller, meanwhile, was pursuing leads based on Clara's journal, a detail I must correct from previous prompts, as this story does not involve Clara. The focus is solely on Sarah's actions and any evidence of her direct manipulation of Theodore Vance and the property, and my own meticulous financial records, trying to trace any illicit offshore transfers or hidden assets related to Arthur Jr.'s wedding scheme, though the direct connection to Sarah and Mark's current actions was still being established. The tension mounted as Mr. Davies uncovered information, suggesting Sarah had leveraged Arthur Jr.'s wedding expenses as a cover for Arthur Sr.'s financial transactions to fund their own clandestine operation, a detail that further fueled my determination to expose their scheme. The evidence was accumulating, painting a grim picture of calculated greed and familial betrayal. We learned that Sarah had actively sought to isolate me after Arthur Sr.'s death, claiming to handle family matters to shield me from the stress, which now appeared to be a calculated move to gain unilateral access to documents and influence. This confirmed that Sarah's actions were not born of necessity, but of a ruthless desire for control and profit, a plan meticulously executed under the guise of filial care. The rising tension wasn't just about the financial loss. It was about the horrifying realization that my own daughter, the child I had raised, had conspired with her husband to steal my life's work, using the very building I had poured my heart and soul into as their ultimate prize. Armed with my original property deeds, Vance Properties, incorporation papers, and a meticulously organized ledger detailing decades of my sole management and financial investment, I met with Mr. Davies to formulate our defense. He was methodical, his approach calm and reassuring, a vital counterpoint to my own emotional turmoil. "Theodore," he began, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with a professional solemnity. "Your documentation is impeccable. It clearly establishes your ownership and management history. Our primary strategy will be to prove undue influence and potentially fraud in any documentation Sarah might try to present to counter this. We need to show that Arthur Sr. intended for you to retain control and benefit from the property, and that Sarah's actions were intended to circumvent this. He advised us to gather sworn affidavits from long-term tenants who could attest to my fair dealings and the building's consistent management under my leadership, and, crucially, to highlight Sarah's lack of experience and her immediate actions as evidence of her predatory intent. He also suggested contacting Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr.'s longtime business partner, whose testimony could speak to Arthur Sr.'s unwavering trust in me and his intentions for the business and the property. Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast support system, their practical advice and emotional encouragement invaluable. They helped me navigate the initial financial shock, organizing small fundraisers for my immediate living expenses and providing a much-needed sense of community. They reminded me of my own resilience, of the strength Arthur Sr. had always seen in me, and encouraged me to focus on my fight for justice. I began attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex emotions of grief for the son I thought I knew, the simmering anger at the betrayal and the profound sense of loss that permeated my days. The process was painful, often emotionally taxing but undeniably cathartic, helping me to reframe the narrative from one of helpless victimhood to one of determined self-preservation. I began to meticulously document every aspect of my life that had been impacted, not just the financial devastation, but the emotional toll, the social isolation, and the psychological impact of such a profound breach of trust. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle, it was for my own psychological recovery, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The war had officially begun, but I was ready to fight. Mr. Davies also initiated legal proceedings to freeze any assets Arthur Jr. or Clara might have attempted to transfer. Though the recovery of the stolen funds remained a daunting challenge, the stakes were incredibly high, not just for my financial future, but for my very identity as a man who had built his life and legacy through honest work and unwavering dedication. He also advised me on presenting Sarah's recent actions, tripling the rent, changing management, and evicting me as further proof of her malicious intent and disregard for any prior arrangements or emotional ties. The courtroom was a stark, impersonal space, its austere architecture and hushed atmosphere a world away from the festive yet ultimately hollow grandeur of Arthur Jr.'s wedding. The proceedings felt surreal, a legal battle against my own daughter, a woman whose existence had been intertwined with my deepest love and trust, now standing as an adversary. Sarah and Mark, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had raised them, sat across the aisle, flanked by their formidable legal team led by Mr. Sterling, a man renowned for his aggressive courtroom tactics. Sterling, with practiced efficiency, presented their defense, subtly portraying me as an elderly, overly trusting parent, easily manipulated by my own declining years and perhaps influenced by external parties, rather than the rightful owner and manager of Vance Properties. He highlighted my temporary displacement and financial distress, attempting to frame it as evidence of my inability to manage affairs rather than the direct consequence of their fraud. Sarah, in her testimony, adopted the guise of a dutiful daughter who had merely stepped in to protect the family legacy from her father's perceived mismanagement and vulnerability. Her words dripped with feigned concern and a subtle accusation of my own failings. Mark corroborated her story, his testimony carefully worded to avoid any direct admission of their conspiracy. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Sarah and Mark across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had raised them, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal. Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court, to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the wedding, the eviction, the calculated manipulation. I presented Clara's journal, correcting myself as this story is about Sarah. The crucial evidence here would be Clara's journal if she were involved. But in this context, it would be evidence found that shows Sarah's own planning and motivations. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered pointing to a deliberate scheme, including the journal and the suspicious financial activities. Mr. Harrison, Arthur Sr.'s business partner, testified to Arthur Sr.'s deep trust in me and his unwavering commitment to Vance Properties. Directly contradicting any implication of my mismanagement, Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering dedication to my business and my tenants. Painting a picture of a capable businessman, not a vulnerable old man, my own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life with Arthur Sr., of his values, his deep belief in my abilities, and the stark contrast between the man he knew and the daughter who had orchestrated this devastating betrayal. My business acumen was built over decades of honest work, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction. Arthur Sr. trusted me, and my daughter, blinded by greed, sought to steal what I had built. This claim is a lie, orchestrated by avarice and manipulation. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal, an attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of justice as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. He tried to twist my efforts to protect my remaining assets and seek justice into evidence of erratic behavior, but I calmly explained the necessity of securing my future after discovering the extent of their fraud. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the forensic analysis of the building's ownership transfer documents, revealing subtle inconsistencies and irregularities that suggested they may have been falsified or manipulated, a detail that sent a palpable ripple of shock through the courtroom. The carefully constructed facade of Sarah and Mark's claims began to crumble, exposed by the undeniable weight of truth and the collective testimonies of those who knew my history and dedication. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice, delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented, particularly Clara's journal again. I must correct this to Sarah's planning documents found by Mr. Davies, the testimonies of Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Gable, and the forensic analysis of the property transfer documents. She highlighted the clear pattern of exploitation and the lack of any legitimate claims Sarah or Mark had to the building. Based on my extensive history of ownership and management, the evidence strongly suggests a calculated scheme of financial fraud and deception. Justice Sterling stated, her voice firm and resonant. The defendant's actions appear motivated by greed rather than familial obligation or legitimate business need. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Theodore Vance. The transfer of ownership is deemed fraudulent and is hereby nullified. Full control and ownership of Vance properties, including all associated assets, are restored to Mr. Theodore Vance. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had one. It wasn't just about regaining the building, though. That was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Sarah and Mark, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by Bates. Their calculated scheme, so meticulously planned, had unraveled. Exposed by the unwavering commitment to truth and the collective weight of evidence and testimony, justice in this instance had been served not with vengeance, but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right and lawful. The verdict marked the end of one harrowing chapter and the beginning of another, the chapter of my own rebuilding, and perhaps a surprising turn of events for my daughter, who now faced the consequences of her actions. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep, restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The building, once the looming specter of my impending loss, the physical embodiment of my deepest betrayal, was now a sanctuary reclaimed, its familiar walls breathing with the echoes of a life truly lived, a life now secured against further predation. I walked through each floor, my fingers tracing the worn marble of the lobby, my gaze lingering on the plaques and signage that bore my name, Vance Properties, a testament to decades of hard work and integrity. The legal victory had not erased the sharp sting of betrayal, the deep wound left by my daughter's actions, but it had irrevocably shifted the ground beneath my feet, paving the way for a genuine healing. A process of rebuilding that began not with forgetting, but with integrating the painful lessons learned. I made the difficult decision to sell my personal residence, the place that held too many memories of both joy and profound sorrow. The proceeds, carefully managed with Mr. Davies' guidance, allowed me to solidify my financial independence and to make strategic yet decisive moves. The first was to reassert my authority over Vance Properties, not with vengeance, but with a firm hand. I called a meeting with all the tenants, my long-standing community. Standing in the now familiar lobby, I announced that as the sole and rightful owner, I would be implementing new rental agreements. The rent, I explained, would be adjusted to reflect current market rates, a significant increase, essentially tripling the previous amounts for those who had been paying under Sarah and Mark's scheme, and a substantial yet fair increase for others. This wasn't about punishment, but about restoring the financial health and integrity of the business I had built, and ensuring its stability for the future. I also made a point of purchasing a new luxury sedan, a modest indulgence that symbolized my regained autonomy. A vehicle I had deferred buying for years, and a fancy car that whispered of my regained prosperity. Sarah and Mark, I learned through the grapevine, had been forced to sell their own assets, including their flashy sports car, to cover their legal fees and the initial restitution orders. They were, by all accounts, struggling, their dreams of rapid wealth dissolving into the harsh reality of their actions. I offered them no direct contact, no further engagement, respecting the boundaries that had been so brutally violated. My focus was on rebuilding, on reclaiming my life, not on dwelling in the ruins of their deceit. I began to re-engage with the tenants, listening to their concerns, addressing maintenance issues that had been neglected, and reaffirming the fair and equitable management that had been Vance Properties' hallmark. My interactions with them were marked by a renewed sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for their loyalty. I even found myself collaborating with Mrs. Gable and her friends, not just for emotional support, but for practical advice on community engagement and property management. Finding strength and camaraderie in their shared experiences, the house was gone, but in its place I had found something far more valuable: a renewed sense of self, a testament to my resilience, and a spirit unburdened by the weight of my daughter's betrayal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing at my new, more manageable apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, a view so different from the familiar oak tree in my old yard, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The apartment was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The sun warmed my face, and the faint scent of possibility seemed to fill the air. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. Sarah's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of her desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. The inheritance of millions, the catalyst for her betrayal, had paradoxically led me to the greatest inheritance of all: the profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth and the unshakable freedom to live my life, finally, for myself. I had learned that love cannot be demanded or bought. It must be earned and freely given, and that true security lies not in the possessions or relationships one accumulates, but in the inner strength and resilience one cultivates. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my building. They were mine, in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and purpose. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of building, of giving, and of profound betrayal, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and the unyielding power of fighting for what is rightfully yours. The journey from being kicked out by my own daughter for being an extra mouth to reclaiming my building, my finances, and my dignity has been arduous, marked by deep pain, righteous anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. My business, Vance Properties, was not just a source of income, it was a symbol of my life's work, and I would not let it be tarnished by deceit. I learned that the greatest assets are not always financial, but the resilience of the spirit and the wisdom gained through hardship. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and hope. Please consider leaving a comment below. I am always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you reclaim your life after such a devastating betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming one's life and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery.